Buenos dias, wonderful people. It's Midnight here from Midnight Music Mixing. Today I wanted to continue on the previous video talking about the mixing basics and like the philosophy behind it. In the last video, I really talked about getting a clear image of what you want out of your mix, having a goal that you can constantly follow to make sure you don't stray. Today I wanted to get to talk about mixing mindset. So mixing mindset isn't really about styles of mixing, New York style, LA style. That doesn't really exist very much these days. It's pretty homogenized. Mixing mindset is how you prepare your mind before starting a mix. So for me, I usually ask for reference tracks from the artist, producer, the label, whoever my client is, before starting the process. And I really dive into their references to try to get a good idea of what it is that they want from the mix. And once I think I have that, I communicate with the client to make sure that what I think they want is what they actually want. It really streamlines the process, and it makes it so I don't have to do as many revisions. At least I found that. And yeah, so those references are really important. Knowing what your client wants is super important, and that's an easy way to like get a reference based on other artists, other projects that have already been released, and that the artist knows like, hey, this is kind of the line that I'm going for. Once I have that done, usually that's when I start my mix. I start it with templates. I have a couple templates. I'll set up a template. My templates usually have submasters, that's what I call them, for like a drum submaster, instruments, vocals, backup vocals. I have an effects submaster. I have an all but effects submaster, because usually I want to do things to maybe the instruments that I don't want done to the effects, or vice versa. So I already have that set up, so that way I can get most of the technical stuff out of the way before beginning the mix, because the last thing you want is when you're really being creative in the mix, you're in the groove, having to do routing and unnecessary stuff that takes you out of the mindset. So I like to prepare that first. Then usually I bring down the level of all the faders to about -5 dB, and I play the song to see how much headroom I have left, that way I'll know if my loudest instrument is at -5. I probably won't clip. It's just it saves me time. Usually when you mix with all the compression and the EQ, the levels tend to creep up a little bit, and that makes sure that I don't have that problem. And then I continue by lowering all the faders and then going one by one and setting up my song. Usually I do this in the loudest section of the song, usually the chorus, and that'll give me a pretty basic setup to know where each instrument has to be. Obviously, as the song dynamics go on, there's sections that you have to bring up or bring down, but for the most part, as a starting basis, setting those levels up, I can get a pretty good idea of how the mix is going to go. And also adding to that is panning. Panning, really good planning on how you're going to pan things so that instruments that are in the same frequency range aren't panned in the same place, really keeps you from having to carve out a lot of frequencies from instruments that you might not have to. So if you can get a good mix, decent sounding mix from levels and panning, you know that your mix is going to be pretty streamlined. I also like to test in mono, see the clarity of stuff in mono, and that lets me know what's being muddied up. I didn't believe in this for the longest time. I did it accidentally one time, and I was wondering, like, why can't I get this mix to sound wider? And then I realized it was panned in mono in the interface. And so I saw the advantage of putting your mix in mono every once in a while and tweaking it that way. And it really does make a difference in how clean your mix can sound, because you make your decisions, your panning decisions, your EQ decisions on if you didn't have that white space. I mean, if you're in stereo, you have a pretty white space and you can pick and choose. But when you're in mono, you really have to make sure that the frequencies aren't battling, and using mono every once in a while really does help. Once I got my levels and my panning and I have my template set up, I'm good to start on the mix. I usually like to throw an EQ across the top of every single track, because 90% of the time, if I'm gonna start on a track, the first thing I put on is EQ, and it really saves me time not to have to go track by track individually, setting those up. So yeah, that's another time saver that I found, based on how I mix. Maybe you mix differently, but those plugins that you know that you're going to use consistently, just set those up beforehand, so that way you don't have to take time pulling up your plugins, and it really streamlines your mixing. So yeah, get your mixing mindset straight. So based on what the client wants, which is the most important thing, that's our job, to please the client, and set your goals beforehand. Writing it down works great. Usually I type it into the computer and put a Word file in the same folder as my whole session. That way I never lose it. And yeah, set your levels and your panning, and it'll really help you out streamline your mix. If a song sounds really bad just with levels and panning, there's probably something wrong. There's probably either arrangement issues, timing issues, frequency issues, and I'll also let you know what things you have to work on first. So that's everything for today. Again, this is Midnight from Midnight Music Mixing.